Hello, welcome to the Tour of Pleasure. You're in the enchanted kingdom of Hermione. We're just sitting around watching hockey, bubbles, listening to records. I'm going on a thing. I've sort of had one of those things that happens to me all the time now, where I've been sort of not forced, but I've had cause to revisit an artist who I had not thought about at all for decades, many decades. And it's sometimes through the weirdest things. And in this particular instance, it was my dear neighbor, Jillian, who doesn't have any kind of a stereo at home to play things on. And she mentioned that she had a CD of this record that she was absolutely loved, but she didn't understand why she had bought the CD for like a quarter, I think it was, because she didn't have anything to play it on. So she gave it to me. I brought it home and I realized I already had an old copy of it, which was just the original album. And this one that she had given me for what she had paid a quarter for was bung full of the ever desirable bonus tracks. So I took it home. Now, the thing is that this record, I'd always thought was kind of a piece of crap, blown over, I didn't really like it much. But there's things about this record that are fascinating to me. And the record in question is Days of Future Past by the Moody Blues. Now, I was not really ever into the Moody Blues much. I remember when Question came out. I really liked Question because in my 12-year-old mind, or when I was earlier actually, I would have been about 11. I really liked the sound of the 12-string guitar, and ba-ba, all that sort of stuff. They were a pretty bombastic, kind of schmaltzy, orchestral pop band of the English variety. And I never loved them. I mean, I liked them. And some of their hits were okay. And they had a terrific career. They sold a lot of records. Started their own label, which always made me, I love the idea of little bands having labels. And but I didn't really know much about them, although I had heard their first single was Go Now, which was a whole different incarnation of the band. Denny Lane was in the band, and there was another guy, I can't remember his name. And then after Go Now was a big hit, it was a big hit, both sides of the Atlantic, things kind of stagnated. Denny Lane and the other guy quit. Justin Hayward and John Lodge joined. So that's really the birth of the Moodies as we all knew them. And not too long after that, this album came out. Now, this album is an interesting story because they were Decca, their label, who are mostly idiots in almost everything they've ever done. They passed on the Beatles, which wasn't very smart. Mind you, having said that, and to be fair, that demo that they listened to, I wouldn't assign them either, because the drummer is terrible. But at any rate, their Go Now had been on Decca, had been a big hit. They were still under contract, and somebody in the label, I'm not sure whose idea this was, got the idea of pairing them with the London Festival Orchestra, and they were going to do a rock version of Dvorak's New World Symphony. And that was going to be this hip piece of classical music. And the Moodies kind of heard this and went, and they thought it's sort of a good idea, except that we really don't want to do Dvorak. So they basically went and said yes, and then when they went in to record, they did their own music. And a lot of it was orchestrated and conducted by Peter Knight, who's a fairly well-known sort of, whatever you want to call him, light pop orchestrator in Britain in those days. And the band did their little concept record, which they had kind of written. And it's like all concept records. There's a couple of good songs. When I was a child, Tuesday Afternoon hit the airwaves here. And I kind of don't mind that song. I like the way it changes in the middle to the do 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 do, and it's a pretty good pop song. And then they had now that was that was off of this album, right? Tuesday Afternoon was the sort of, I think it was the first single, at least over here. Nights in White Satin is a schlocky piece of stuff that I just never liked it. But, you know, it was the big hit. And when this record was going to come out, Decca decided they were going to be innovative on many fronts. And one of them was they were going to start a new hip underground label. And they were going to call it Daram. And I forget all of this now. But Daram was basically going to be the kids label, the pop label. And it was called Daram because they had what they called Dynamic Sound System. See that in the corner. Now, Dynamic Sound, they kind of made it out to be some kind of innovation in audio technology. And it wasn't really much of it. It was basically vapor. It wasn't anything. I tried to research this, believe it. Dynamic sound, in those days, stereo was either left, right, or center. When you recorded an orchestra with stereo pairs, you got the broad left and right. You could have the oboes over here at 2 o'clock, and it all worked perfectly well. So the dynamic sound was they were going to record rock bands in this sort of stereo. Okay, now, except for that this record wasn't recorded that way. It was recorded the traditional way with the band doing their thing in the studio in the 4 tracks, and then the orchestra being overdubbed on top of the band in dynamic sound stereo, sure, but it's all a pile of horse shit is what it is. So they quickly dropped the dynamic sound thing on the cover. Most of you will not, they'll go, what's that thing? That's what it looked like when it came out. And Decca was full of crap, but they had Phase 4 stereo, which again was just basically recorded on 4 tracks. What the hell does that mean? They had FFRR back in the old days, which basically means full range. Sure. But these were not innovations or anything. These weren't different than they were mic placements, perhaps. So Decca was always full of crap. So this record came out, and the good news is Daram turned into a pretty cool label. Put out all kinds of weird, like Giles and Fripp, and everything. Just it goes on and on. Now, okay, why am I even bothering with this thing? Because it really is kind of. However, the bonus tracks, and when she gave this to me, I went, oh, okay. Well, I guess came home and realized I've already got it. Really? Where did I must have got it for free somewhere? So I pulled the old one out and okay, I'll put this. Okay, and I noticed the first bonus track is their version, BBC radio session, of the very, 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 very first appearance of Hayward and Lodge. And they're doing a BBC radio session where they do Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood. Because remember, before this album, they were an R&B band. And, you know, Eric Burton and the Animals had done this song. They did, and instead of the guitar lick, of course you have Ray Thomas's flute. It's horrible. I mean, it's okay. It's funny. I'm glad I'm listening to it. But, and here's the thing. This is the moment, and I talk about the moment a lot. This is the moment where the Moody Blues became the Moody Blues, because Mike Pinder, the keyboardist, was working in the Mellotron factory, building Mellotrons, which were these totally newfangled things that sounded like an orchestra. Well, they'd done this record with this orchestra, and I think actually the Mellotron is on the record with the orchestra, but not all that much. But even though he worked in the factory, they were so expensive he couldn't afford to buy one. Finally, he bought a cheap one somehow, and he was determined to incorporate it into the band. So what we have after this BBC session, which kind of gets our feet wet with what the band's going to sound like with Hayward and Lodge in it, with an amusing cover version. Then you get the singles. Now, there's a great video channel called Yesterday's Papers. They do this series of wonderful videos, very well done, where every month of the 60s they go over which singles came out in Britain. And there really is an emphasis on sort of collectible, stuff that collectors really dig nowadays. But they go over all the big bands as well, everything. And this has gotten me listening to singles from the 60s that in many cases I did not know exist. And there are two here. One is called Fly Me High, which is a Hayward original. I Really Haven't Got the Time, which is a Pinder original, where Pinder shows himself to be a pretty darn good barrel house pianist. And these are classic British 60s pop singles. I don't think either of them did anything in the charts, but this brief period of time in the 60s was just chock-a-block with these things. And they're actually great little songs. And they would go great on a comp. And then the second single was called Love and Beauty, Leave This Man Alone, which I think was a Pinder one. And it was more, they were kind of going psychedelic maybe a bit. And it introduces the mellotron. And the mellotron is a weird one because it was a strange instrument, kind of like an early sampler, if you will. It had recordings of orchestras playing on it, and you would play it with a keyboard. And this is one of those weird instances in rock and roll history where a technological innovation basically created a band and a sound. Because without the mellotron, the Moody's would, I don't think, have ever done anything. But once incorporated into the band's sound, it, after a while, started to dominate the band's sound. Everything was kind of written around the mellotron. And the mellotron is probably more closely associated with these guys than pretty much anybody else, other than maybe King Crimson. So you have Love and Beauty, Leave This Man Alone, which is another great single from 68, I think, maybe. And then you have Cities, which was the B-side of Nights in White Satin, and it doesn't sound anything like Nights in White Satin. So these 5 tracks alone delighted me and made this thing well worth keeping. And then you get 4 alternate versions and outtakes. So you get Tuesday Afternoon, Dawn Is a Feeling, The Sunset, and Twilight Time. And these were reduction mixes. So in order to overdub orchestra on some of these, they had to take the band recordings and mix them down to whatever. And so you have, these are basically pre-orchestral reduction mixes. There's one alternate take, alternate mix, Tuesday Afternoon. These are kind of for fans only, I would say. But the real thing about this, now there's a funny thing is, their producer at Decca, forever, he was a staff producer, was a guy named Tony Clark. He is not mentioned anywhere on this, which is weird. And there's a picture, there's a picture in here of here you go, here's the meeting between the Moody's and the technical staff of Decca. None of these people are mentioned. None of these engineers who were responsible for this amazing technological breakthrough of dynamic sound. You know, none of these guys there, for whatever reason, none of them are credited. Instead, expanded CD reissue compiled and produced by Mark Powell. Okay? Album stereo mix remastered from the original master tapes by Alberto Parodi and Justin Hayward at Logical Box Studios, Genova, Italy. Fine. Bonus tracks remastering by somebody else. Project coordinated for you. Nowhere is Tony Clark mentioned. Which makes me wonder, you know, like it's nowhere in the note. The notes, they kind of allude to Tony in the notes. But like, for instance, they give you a good little booklet, right? There's the bonus tracks. They give you a little thing of the bonus tracks. But they don't mention who records anything. Oh, and then you get to the extra tracks at the end. Then you get, oh, there, produced by Tony Clark. Okay. That's the only production credit anywhere. From what I remember, Tony Clark produced the whole thing, and what's his name? Derek Barnell, I think, was the main engineer at Decca. But for some reason, they're not included, which makes me kind of wonder. Anyway, if you're into the music, Moody Blues, Days of Future Past, this is a terrific thing. It has cost me nothing, so I'm going to keep it. It is a mostly overblown piece of crap, but you know what? I'm going to listen to it again and give it one more chance and try to take myself back to, I think it was 1968, November 67, I think it says it came out. Give it one more shot, go through these singles again, because the singles are actually lots of fun. And I'm glad it was forced into my consciousness. Now, the frightening part is, these things tend to spread. And so, another record that I found, or CD I should say, that I'm not going to talk about much here, because it will be talked about later, is that the second I got this, I found a cover version by somebody very odd, doing Nights in White Satin, which made me laugh. But we'll talk about that in a different video. Thanks for watching. Feedback, as always, is appreciated, especially hate mail. If you think this is one of the greatest records ever made and that I'm an idiot, I'd love to hear from you, because maybe you're right. Who knows? Maybe I'll listen to it and have an epiphany. Like, oh, that does happen. It does happen. Anyway, thanks for watching. And don't forget to subscribe. And we'll notify you. And take care of each other. Try to set a good example. We'll talk to you later.